Where are we, Cindy?
Patisserie Valerie in London's Victoria.
We are indeed, and we are enjoying a fantastic looking cream tea.
I can't wait to have it.
We've worked our way through some fantastic little sandwiches, and there are some beautiful pastries on the top here, top plate.
This chocolate cake is just staring at me.
It is, and also those little mini eclairs as well.
Yeah.
They look really good, don't they? But we're here really for one thing, I suppose, which is the centerpiece of any cream tea, which is the scone.
The scones.
Or scones, as if you're weird, would call them. So I feel this is a big moment here for the Education Podcast, and for us probably, really something about this. So depending on which way you go here. So I suppose the first question is, fruit or plain? What are you going to go for?
I think I'll go with the plain one today.
Go plain, okay. Yeah. So she's taking it off the plate there. It's
really nice and warm, fresh out of the oven. So I think I'll take some cream and put some jam on top.
Wow. So breaking BSI EdPod news, Cindy is going for the cream on first. So talk us through that decision. I mean, I would have gone the other way, but cream on first for you.
That's really interesting. I thought of the cream because it's like putting butter on bread.
Well, a lot of people think that, but they're absolutely wrong.
Then what's your logic?
Well, I think cream is a topping,
right,
for any pudding or cake really. And also I think practically getting jam on first, it's easier to put the cream on top of jam than jam on top of cream, don't you think?
You do have a point there.
Do you have a point there? I think either way though, I think they're going to taste fantastic. Now obviously with our scone we need tea.
Yes.
So I've got milk substitute in mine. If you've got anything in your tea?
I've added some honey to mine.
Honey, nice. So, well, let's. Should we tuck into this?
Yes, let's do it.
Here's the episode.
Sweet.
Bringing you the stories behind the standards. This is the BSI Education Podcast with Matthew Childs and Cindy Paragill. Today's episode is on standards and food.
Hello. My name is Matthew Childs and I am with
Cindy Paragill.
Hello Cindy, how are you?
Chipper, and you?
Tip top. Now, the aim of this podcast is to bring you the stories behind the standards. And in this episode, we are tucking into the subject of standards and food. And I've only just about recovered from discovering that for scones, for Cindy, it's cream before jam.
Matthew, I'm sure our friendship and the podcast can survive this earth-shattering news. Yes, we're looking at standards and food with our expert guest, Sara Walton, sector lead for food at BSI. Sara tells us about the relationship between standards and regulation in the sector, some of the new innovations standards are enabling, and the impact of Brexit. Now, in our cream tea disagreement, I mentioned sweetening my tea with a little bit of honey. And Sara also has some interesting things to say about the definition of honey. This episode is the latest of our sector tasters, following on from those we have done for health, built environment, and transport. Check out the podcast feed. Did you see what I did there?
I did. Now, this episode is jam-packed with food punnage. Also in this episode, we have our standards desk of news and the latest of our My Favourite Standard. This time we hear from BSI's Ivan Salcedo. Ivan tells us about why BS 5261-2, copier preparation and proof correction, is his favourite standard. Now, Cindy, as we've said, this is a food episode, and I want to stick with the issue of our cream tea for a moment.
Here we go again.
Now, Alan Sellers, formerly of the BSI EdPod, put up something on social media recently. By the way, Alan, I hope you're enjoying your new job, which actually, Cindy, is food related. But really? I think for us to mention the brand name that Alan works for, I think we'd need the promise of one of his products, wouldn't we? Yeah. Anyway, did you see this? Did you see what Alan put up?
I did.
Now, Alan was taking a well-earned break from his engineering endeavours and, like us, also indulging in some tea and cake at a local cafe and thinking, as he always does when he's drinking tea, about the standards BS 6008 and ISO 3103 methods for brewing tea.
Of course.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Well, for some reason, on this occasion, he decided to take a look at the bottom of his cup and saw the following printed on it: BS 4034, which prompted him to shout to everyone in the cafe, "Standards are everywhere!"
Yeah, he didn't, did he?
Actually, I think I made that bit up. But no doubt he was tempted. Now, BS 4034 is a standard from 1990 and is a specification for vitrified hotelware, which covers, amongst other things, thermal testing, stain tests, and water absorption.
Vitrified?
Yeah, I had to look that up too. It's the firing process for clay to make it scratch and stain resistant. But this got me thinking, new feature klaxon. What other standards are printed out there on everyday items out in the wild?
That's a good question.
Maybe we could call it hashtag BSI Spy.
I love that.
Now, many people might be familiar with the standards you see on manhole covers, such as EN124 and BS497. Take a look next time you step over one of those. So we thought, if you see a standard number out there, then email it to us at education@bsigroup.com, or better still, post a photo in social media using that hashtag BSI Spy, as well as the usual hashtag BSI EdPod. Now, before we get going proper, a quick reminder that for more information on BSI education, go to bsigroup.com/education. Do please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the podcast and you listen via Apple Podcasts, then please consider giving us a 5-star rating. It's quick and easy, and it really does make a difference to us being found in search and recommendations. Share us on social media using that hashtag BSI EdPod. And if you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, or even ideas for future episodes, then do please get in touch at education@bsigroup.com. We really welcome your feedback.
Are you a postgraduate studying at a UK university? Do you have a research idea or project that involves standards in some way? Well, if so, BSI Student Research Program can help. The way it works is simple. We gain valuable information about an area of interest to our standards work, while you can benefit from mentorship to support your project and the chance to gain knowledge and exposure that may increase your future employability. To find out more about the program, including case studies of previously supported projects and how to apply, visit bsigroup.com/education.
So, in this episode, our guest is Sara Walton, BSI Sector Lead for Food. In this first course, Sara talks about some of the key standards issues in the food sector, such as digital transformation and new technologies, plus the relationship between BSI and the Food Standards Agency. And she also tells us about one of the key standards in the sector, ISO 22000. But we start with Sara's standards journey.
Well, I've been in standards making for around 15 years now, which is somewhat of a shock to me when I thought you might ask me this question. But I've come from an information background, from business and legal publishing. So I was always interested in making sure that people knew things that they needed to know in order to operate the best they could. It was always about educating and giving people learning that they needed. And in fact, a lot of the stuff I did in legal and business publishing was talking about standards. So you could say almost my entire career has been, sort of leading to this point in a way. And I've been, as I say, when I came into this standards making world, I was, funnily enough, one of the first committees I was working on was the food committee, the food safety committee. So that was interesting. And I'd come, as I say, I was doing food hygiene, best practice books, and information and newsletters in my publishing career as well. So it's quite sort of an interesting circle that I've come to now.
And tell us about your role now for BSI.
So right now I'm the sector lead for the agri-food sector, which entails having an overview of all of the sort of standards and knowledge that might be needed by organisations who operate in the food sector. and so that's actually quite a lot of different topics and subjects, because of course, obviously the food sector is a big sector in the UK. It's the fourth largest manufacturing sector, or it might even be the largest one now, actually, and it's the fourth in the world, I think. And it's just that all these sort of organisations they're very keen to know about everything, not just about the food that they're operating and the quality of that, but also about how they should operate their businesses and how they should govern them and what environmental impacts they might have, and how to best manage that performance as well.
We're going to come on later to talk about sort of standards making now within the sector and also looking forward to the future. But just taking a step back, what about the sort of broad history of standards in the food sector? How should I put this? Has it been a growing area over the years?
I mean, it has and it hasn't. It's an interesting one, because we've always been we've always had a lot of standards in food to test its quality, really, and to make sure that it's fit for its purpose, for its consumption. And those standards are used by laboratories mostly. These are microbiological standards, or standards on so microbiology in the food chain, things to do with the content of particular cereal products, for example, determination of properties of dough, what sort of hydration, what sort of moisture content there is in milk or in meat or something like that. So there are very specific tests that have to be done in order to check that quality. And those have been going for many, many years, those sorts of standards. I think certainly in the international space, it's one of the oldest committees, the Foodstuffs Committee, the Food Products Committee, and we've been mirroring that and working with experts in that area for years now. And then we had the whole sort of broader-based food quality management, food safety management as a system. How do you manage the system within any aspect of the food chain? So that's the big standard in this area, the 22,000 standard. But I would say that those sorts of really fundamental sort of building blocks, those standards, are not maybe best recognised by the consumers or even a lot of the organisations that may take standards, because mostly those standards they rely on them, but they're used by the laboratories or the testing houses. They're not used specifically by retailers or brands or people like who are using them as end product. But now we're finding that there are much more standards growing in new fields. So apologies for using that pun. I knew I would. But all of the sort of innovation around new production methods that I mentioned, and new methods of producing food, such as fortifying food with nutrients in a traditional method of propagation, so as to ensure that there would be the best aspect of, or the most zinc or vitamin A or iron within that crop. That's a sort of a new research piece that has now is now being standardized, and there are also production methods such as needing robotics. Digitization is a huge issue now in the food chain, and how best that will be used to ensure that we get the most out of the food that we finally get on our plates, and that it is produced in the best and most sustainable ways possible. Digitization is going to be key to that, and so a lot of the standards we're seeing now are coming around that sort of the robotics, the not just the robotics, but also the next stages down. How does that data get used? What is So not specifically about food as such, but how it's being managed within the chain. So I would say that's where the growth is. A lot of the growth is around, yes, there's innovative methods, and yes, obviously there are all sorts of stuff around industrial biotechnology and use of, and there's insect protein being, coming online. But at the moment, that's mostly an animal feed. But and right now, there's not much in the way of standardization in that space. But people are talking about it. They're starting to think about, what do we need in order to make this new method of taking brewers' waste and turning it into a rich source of omega-3 instead of using fish stocks. What do we need in order to make that into a more viable industry, a more viable possibility, a production method, food method, source, to encourage others to enter that market? And maybe we need something that will give it structure, that will help others to understand that this is the best way to do these things in order to move forward and to scale up and to commercialize better. So those are the sorts of areas, the sort of innovative types of foodstuffs themselves and production methods, and also the sort of digitizing part of it, I would say. And we are seeing definitely, ISO, for example, have just started a smart farming special advisory group, and that smart farming covers all sorts of issues, including how best to use food waste. What sorts of things are we doing with food waste in order to either put it into the circular economy or think about its sustainable aspects, to manage it better, so that we're not losing so much, or and also the other side of things, which I've just mentioned, things like digitization and crop robotics and those sorts of areas as well. These are all things that, the whole sort of area of agri-economics is very much, I think, under the spotlight in this new group, which hasn't met yet. But I know that we've already nominated experts to go to that, or one expert actually to go to that group from Harper Adams University. So we're sort of very we're very keen to be involved in the UK in in ensuring that best practice is being examined and explored in the most effective way possible.
You mentioned there, Sarah, about some of the issues around digital transformation and sort of new technologies, and I think that's it's interesting to hear that those issues are obviously important for this sector, as they are for lots of other sectors across the economy. I just think in the UK, just go back to sort of architecture for a second, a lot of people will have heard of the Food Standards Agency. And I just wonder if you could explain sort of the relationship between BSI as a national standards body and the Food Standards Agency, and maybe some of the other sort of important stakeholder players within this particular sector.
So the Food Standards Agency is the regulatory agency for the UK. They're the regulators. They effectively enforce the quality of and safety of food in the UK. So as regulators, although they're called Standards Agency, standards is an awkward word, isn't it? it's that awkward word. It means one thing and in our everyday speech, and that's why it appears in so many of these conversations about food, because obviously what we're looking for is to maintain, particularly for what we're eating, good standards of safety and hygiene in our food. And that's essentially what the Food Standards Agency are doing. And so they have a lot of best practice. They actually are very instrumental in a number of the standardization pieces that I talked about in the microbiological area, because they have a lot of scientists who know what should be, safe levels of, various things within different foodstuffs, or ways in which you should test that and what the parameters ought to be in order to allow this thing to be on the shelf in any sense whatsoever, for safer consumers. So that's what the Food Standards Agency does, and evidently we work closely with them to ensure that aspects of that is aspects of the safety is very much to the fore in standardization. But ultimately they're regulating and enforcing. But they're also exploring, and we sort of hope to support their a very important collaborator, and because they're a regulator, they're also a body that we hope to be able to support with what we do around supporting infrastructure most effectively. So to support and complement some of the regulatory things that they need to bring in, we hope to be able to support that with standards. As I say, I've mentioned some of the ones that we have already, but we've also looking to the future. The Food Standards Agency is interested as the next body in digitization and data trust in the food supply chain, and making sure that those things are effectively and holistically brought in to make them work as well as possible for the whole food system. So there's the Food Standards Agency, and then you've got a number of really key players. So you've got the Food and Drink Federation, who are the big industrial federation. So they represent many of the food organisations, food companies in the UK, and they're very active, and they are very much respected by government, and they sit on trade advisory groups, and they are they are an important voice, and also the National Farmers Union, another very important voice for the producers, and there are a number of very different and very important organisations, but I would say that those two, and obviously the Hospitality Association, but we don't do as much around catering and hospitality perhaps as other groups do.
Now, you mentioned earlier ISO 22000. Can you tell us a bit more about that particular standard?
So 22000 is it's a really important standard because it is the food safety management systems. It's the international standard about food safety management systems. So for any aspect of the food chain, it's recognised very widely internationally. It's becoming more and more recognised via being the basis of quite big certification scheme, which is recognised by the Global Food Safety Initiative, which is a consortia of big food businesses, basically that want to be able to agree amongst themselves that these are the standards that they're operating to, and the Food Safety Management Systems standard has various parts to it. And it has it basically prerequisite programs, they're called, which so that these are sort of part of the specification, if you like, depending upon whether you're in which part of the food chain you're in. So it could be manufacturing, catering, farming, food packaging, manufacturing, transport, storage, feed and animal food production. So it's a big standard with a lot of parts to it that are very important and very much relied upon by people who are thinking, what do I need in order to think my way through a system that will give the best quality and best practice for my production and for my customers ultimately, and for everybody involved.
We'll hear the second course of Sara's interview later. But for now, Cindy, it's that time in the episode. Shall we have the Standards Desk of News?
Yep, let's do it. Good governance.
We are living in rapidly changing and challenging times. And now, more than ever, governing bodies are being called upon to ensure their organisations act with purpose, sustainability and society in mind. Developed by experts across 70 countries, the new standard ISO 37000, Governance of Organisations, can help organisations to meet these challenges head-on. It gives them the tools they need to govern well, enabling them to perform effectively while behaving ethically and responsibly. Investing wisely.
Trillions of dollars. That's the estimated amount of money it will take to mitigate climate change. Green finance is one way of getting there, but a lack of harmonized definitions of what constitutes green threatens to slow its growth. A new series of ISO standards has been published to help. ISO 14030 provides an internationally agreed roadmap for issuing green bonds and loans. And finally, the Little Book of Net Zero.
BSI recently collaborated with the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment to discover how far UK businesses have travelled on the road to net zero. We found that if businesses continue at their current rate of progress, they are highly likely to fall short of the UK government's 2050 net zero target. Help is at hand, however, though, in the form of BSI's recently published Little Book of Net Zero, a short, straightforward how-to guide. To download your free copy, go to bsigroup.com and search The Little Book of Net Zero. And that's the Standards Desk of News.
My favourite standard.
This My Favourite Standard comes courtesy of Ivan Salcedo, who leads on knowledge innovation here at BSI. He tells us about why the standard BS 5261-2, copy preparation and proof correction, is so important to him.
My name is Ivan Salcedo, and I'm the Principal of Knowledge Innovation at BSI. That means I'm looking after the future of standards, in particular the future of digital standards. So it's perhaps inevitable that I've chosen the most analog standard that I can think of, and it was the first one that I really learned to use in anger. It was during a career transition earlier in my career where I was doing a lot of work on corporate communications and copy editing. And I was introduced at evening class to a wonderful thing called BS 5261 Part 2, 2005, Copy Preparation and Proof Correction. Part 2, Specification for Typographic Requirements, Marks for Copy Preparation and Proof Correction, Proofing Procedure. A very, very long-winded introduction, which fortunately I never had to deal with, because what it contains is a series of symbols that you use to mark up text, particularly printed text, if you're looking to change the layout or provide some feedback to either the typesetter or in some cases the author. And it was a fantastic revelation of these kind of wonderful runes of insight and kind of best practice that have been handed down from proofreader to proofreader and typesetter to typesetter for generations, and codified in this way. And I was blissfully unaware. I mean, why would you know? And so I was using these in evening class, and promptly my career as a proofreader turned out to be very non-lucrative. So I went back to my proper job, which was in product development and web application work. And lo and behold, several years later, I am presented with this challenge of this digital standard, which has a very paper-based output. So this particular standard is available in a laminated form. I've yet to laminate a website. This is a particular kind of challenge, I think, for the future. It's a wonderful kind of thing, and you think it's kind of obsolete, really, because it deals with print. And the print industry, by and large, is no longer done on paper, the correction and proofing production process. So it kind of lives on through BS ISO 5776, which is graphic technology symbols for text proof correction. And so many of the same symbols that I'm familiar with there are now kind of part of this, what is essentially kind of typesetting emojis that you can put onto copy. In order to improve the feedback and understand the layout intention of the designer in particular better. So that's it. That's my favourite standard. It's a nice kind of serendipitous journey of discovery, crossing over of analog and digital, and very much focused on publishing.
We return now to our conversation with Sara Walton. In this second course, I speak to Sara about the UK National Food Strategy, the impact of Brexit, and where food standards might go next. But we started by talking about food definitions used around the world, and in particular, for honey.
That's right, and a lot of the terms are still being defined around a lot of products that we eat every day and have been eating for many years. So the honey one, for example, the definition of terms there is still being, is still under discussion, because it is different in different parts of the world. I believe in Germany they don't believe in runny honey. Runny honey does not exist in Germany.
And so you can't really ask the bees, can you? That's the thing. You can't involve the producers in that sense about how they define it.
You can't talk to the bees about it, although you can observe them, which one should, I feel, because they are very important to our survival on the planet. So, but yeah, it is fascinating, and people are very people who produce food are very passionate about it. I found, certainly talking to honey producers, and it's been a really interesting journey for me to meet people who are actively involved every day in ensuring, in the whole sort of business of producing one type of foodstuff or another. In this case, in one case, honey. I've also been talking to people producing cannabinoid as well for consumption, and that's also very interesting because it's not just for consumption, but also there are so many aspects to the cannabinoid issue, which is a very complex one, and is very much under regulatory control. But there's hemp being produced, and hemp is a really interesting material, which isn't necessarily for consumption, but which is as a byproduct of something that is often used for consumption, and yet it has incredible amounts of potential use as a sustainable material, for the future. So there are all these byproducts and different areas which kind of spring from the food chain, which is quite fascinating when you start to work within it.
And I suppose what's also fascinating is you think that arguments or discussions that may have taken place, and you think have nailed down a particular issue. So you're talking there about the definition of honey. You think that, well, we sorted that a long time ago, and we can move on. But I think it's one of the fascinating aspects of standards making is that even those fundamental terms can be broken out again, and a debate needs to take place. So it's constantly looking back and reviewing, thinking, what do we mean by this? What is good practice in this area? Constantly under review.
Absolutely, constantly under review. And you're quite right to mention there are issues of the cultural norms and the ways that different parts of the world think about food. It is very much in play when you're thinking about how you reach some understanding and consensus around what it is that this means, what this term is, what this definition is, before you can start thinking how would you test for it, and what in order to ensure that you have what that give reassurance about what it is you're receiving when you're importing, exporting, buying.
So over the summer, the UK government published its National Food Strategy. I mean, how important a document is that?
Well, I think it's very important. I mean, it's the first national food strategy for about 70 years. And I think it was an independently commissioned document or a report, research, done by Henry under the aegis of Henry Dimbleby, and he consulted very widely, and he basically, this was the second part of it. It was the plan, the things that ought to be in place to support a food system, a sustainable food system going forward into the future. So now it's been presented. It was presented sort of mid-July. The government is taking around 6 months, it said, to digest that, and also to gather its own evidence and think about how it wants to respond to it, and so it's inviting responses from interested stakeholders and different parties, in the food chain, and obviously those who have some impact on it.
And will BSI be playing a role in that? Will we be making our own response to that?
Absolutely, yes. We very much intend to be able to, certainly to make a response and to really sort of, outline what those areas that we, as the standards body, could help support a new way forward, a different way of looking at the food system, and both in terms of its sustainability and its security, thinking about food security and supply chains, and also its it being able to produce good quality food for the population.
Now, I don't think we can talk about food and food standards without mentioning Brexit.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder, from a standards making perspective, what impact does Brexit and Britain leaving the EU have for developing food standards?
Well, it doesn't have much impact for developing food standards as such. I mean, as far as the standards body is concerned in the UK, as far as BSI is concerned, we continue business as usual in making standards and being involved and engaged in the international and the European standards making landscape. So we maintain that and continue, but so the sort of standards that we make will continue to be made around testing food quality, ensuring that it reaches certain standards and that it will suffice and will pass the tests of both consumers and the retail brands who need to be assured of it. So that's not in question. The things that will change are around regulation. At the moment, the regulation, though, has been transferred pretty much wholesale into the UK regulatory system. So it hasn't changed over much just yet. Things may change, obviously, in the future, and that's something that we will doubtless see going forward. But the sorts of consensus standards that we're engaged in won't ultimately change. But there'll be more need of good quality standards, good standards that will reassure people of the quality and authenticity and provenance of food, which is both imported and exported.
So, in terms about the future, then, where do food standards go next? What's on the menu?
The sustainability issue is huge at the moment. Is this feasible, and how can we make this work? I mean, we're going to have. We have the issue of food waste being, I think, if it were a country, I think the emissions from food waste would be something like the third largest country in the world or something. It's vast. So we need to get to grips with some very big issues in the food chain in short order, really, and the way to do that is by approaching it in a holistic way and by making structural agreements so that people can sort of deal with something from a larger perspective rather than coming at it piecemeal. And I think that will be that's what I see for the future. In that particularly these big pieces around, well, how are we going to feed the planet? I mean, we're going to have 9 billion people on the planet by I think it's 2050. I mean, we need to, that's a lot of people to feed, and you do the math, as they say. There's not actually currently the production methods that are being used enough land and sea to produce food in the way that it has been produced up until now. So we need to really be thinking how to do that better, and standards should be able to help people to do that sort of systems thinking from first principles, through to how we get food onto people's plates in the most effective way possible, and it may well be that there will. It's not going to be just one thing here. It's going to be that will be part of the solution. There'll be all sorts of different ways in which things have got to be different in order to keep things going in the right direction for people and planet.
Our thanks to Sara Walton and Ivan Salcedo for their contributions to this episode, and to you for listening. To find out more about the relationship between standards and food, visit bsigroup.com and search food.
You have been listening to an episode of the BSI Education Podcast. Subscribe to us now, wherever you get your podcasts.
You just heard a Stripped Media production.